you never expect the mission to go exactly the way that you planned it, but the old adage of plans are useless, planning is everything. Once you get into the airplane and you're moving at 240, 360, 420 knots, stuff starts happening quickly and you don't have the time. I had to kind of develop the will to prepare because I found out that it didn't matter how well I wanted to do once I got there. If I wasn't ready, I wasn't ready.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Today's guest is a man whose career reads like a blueprint for excellence in modern air power. A warrior scholar, a strategist, a mentor, and now a commander guiding the next generation of Air Force and Space Force officers right here at the University of New Mexico. We're honored to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Robert G. Lacy, a Master Combat Systems Officer with more than 1,800 flight hours, including 669 in combat. He's flown into some of the most demanding operational environments on the planet, from advising senior leaders in Air Force Special Operations Command to advising strategy at Air Command and Staff College. Lieutenant Colonel Lacy has spent his career at the intersection of operations, innovation, and leadership. And now he brings that expertise to Detachment 510, where he's preparing the next generation of officers to lead in a world that demands adaptability, courage, and vision. So buckle up. This conversation is going to take us deeper into the mindset of a combat-tested leader and the future of air power education. But before we get started with the podcast, we'd like to say a special thank you to everybody who's subscribed to us on YouTube, follows us on Spotify, and follows our Facebook page and Instagram at Lobo Pack Podcast. If you'd like to follow along and see what we got next on the podcast, please either subscribe to us, follow us. If you have any comments for us, please share them. We always read through all of our comments. But thank you again, and here's the podcast.
Thank you for being with us. It's an honor to have you on the podcast. But yeah, if you don't mind, we always love to hear where did you start off and what was your sort of origin story?
Yeah, so for me, I'm a combat systems officer, previously known alternately by the names Navigator, Electronic Warfare Officer, Weapon Systems Officer. Commissioned through ROTC in 2006, University of Nebraska, ROTC, and I actually didn't think I was going to be an aviator. I wanted to join the Air Force. I wanted to be involved with airplanes since I was a little kid. I used to beg my parents to take me to air shows, and I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. And so I wanted to do engineering for the Air Force. And then my senior year of high school, I had kind of two things that happened. The first was that I realized calculus was not for me. And the second was September 11th and the attacks on our nation. And so I decided that one, I didn't want to be an engineer, and two, I wanted to join the Air Force and serve as a military member. And so I thought I needed to join the Air Force Academy because I thought that's the only way to become an officer in the Air Force, and then found out through a friend of ours that was in the National Guard about ROTC. I was like, what's ROTC? She's like, well, you go to college, and then you do this training program. When you get done, you graduate, and you become an officer. That sounds way better. I want to do that. And so applied for a scholarship, was selected for a scholarship, and did 4 years at the University of Nebraska, got a degree in geology, and was originally slated to be a communications officer. Number one pick was Intel, wasn't selected for that, was selected for communications. And then it was actually Thursday of finals week, I got a call from my commanding officer, and he said, Lacy, do you want to be a navigator? I was like, I'm supposed to be a comm officer, sir. Yeah, there's a spot for nav school. Do you want to? I was like, I don't know. Can I think about it? It's like, sure, you can think about it, but we need to know by tomorrow morning. And went home, thought about it, came back, like, sir, I don't know, flying, communications is really important, seeing people, all that. He looked at me and he was like, I've been a personnelist for 35 years, or 25 years. Old crusty 06, the Air Force flies planes. Go fly planes. Yes, sir. And so went to nav school at Randolph Air Force Base.
What is a navigator for people who don't know about things in the Air Force? What does that job do compared to being a comms officer?
Yeah. So my my wife jokes that I'm effectively a professional backseat driver. The role of the navigator is essentially to, and really this is expanding with the combat systems officer. So previously, a traditional navigator would know where the plane is and then get the plane to where it needed to be on time. And that those duties still exist, but more and more, a lot of those specific duties are handled by GPS, inertial navigation, various systems. And what the combat systems officer is really doing is managing the mission and doing those kind of specialized mission management tasks that the pilots either don't have the specialized skills for or don't have the time and space in the cockpit to handle. So my first airframe, I flew the EC-138 compass call, and we as the electronic warfare officers were tasked with managing all of the jamming systems and then essentially allocating jamming resources as necessary to enemy comms targets dynamically as the engagement progressed. On my next airframe, I was responsible for primarily defense of the airframe, managing all the defensive electronic attack equipment, and then doing some navigation. And then I cross-trained to the MC-130J in 2019. And on that platform, you're doing much more of would be a traditional navigator role where you are navigating the airplane, providing those navigational inputs to pilots, but also managing things like fuels, timing, airdrops, all that computation and mission management falls to the combat systems officer because the pilots they're busy flying an airplane. And so particularly in dynamic environments where stuff is changing and there might be people shooting at you, the pilots are going to be busy doing pilot stuff, and it's the combat systems officer that's making the mission happen, kind of behind them.
Is that for all airframes?
For the Air Force, combat systems officers are only on fixed-wing aircraft, so there aren't any combat systems officers on either tilt rotor or rotary wing aircraft. Some of those duties are offboarded to like the flight engineers, for instance. So on the CB-22, the flight engineer on that aircraft handles some of that mission management in the background for the pilots when they're not actively doing flight engineer stuff. But for fixed-wing aircraft, generally you will see combat systems officers on airframes where there is a large mission management or tactical burden that the pilots aren't necessarily equipped to handle. Your special operations aircraft are kind of a large chunk of that. So MC-130s, which do special operations, infill, exfil, air refueling, airdrop, resupply. AC-130s, which everybody loves as the gunship. So there are, I believe, 3 CISOs on the U-28, which is a kind of ISR platform that is being transitioned to the Armed Overwatch program. And then HC-130s, so your rescue C-130s, RC-135s, ISR, big wing stuff, EC-130s, electronic attack, B-52s, B-1s, and F-15Es, now EXs, all have a combat systems officer or multiple combat systems officers in them, just because of the nature of those missions and the requirement to manage both navigation, weapons, targets, all those things together, and having that additional crew member on board compared to something like F-16, where it's just a single guy in the cockpit trying to do all this stuff, means that they're going to be substantially more capable to handle dynamic targets in a dynamic environment and do missions effectively in environments where a single seat aircraft is going to be probably a little task saturated.
Going back to like career progression, you said you would wanted to go intel early on, and what do those intel officers do in the Air Force?
Yeah, so intelligence for the Air Force is a pretty broad career field, and everything from collection and analysis all the way through to developing mission packages and briefing aircrew on what their mission's going to be, essentially, and then everything in between. Being a part of that, and I've seen I've seen parts and pieces of it from kind of the outside. Obviously, haven't been in the Intel community myself, but it's really a pretty big beast, and you can spend an entire career either specializing in one part or kind of getting a broad based, multi-int, um, background that gives you kind of perspective on the whole enterprise. But I mean, I've had friends that have worked what we call DGS, or distributed ground station, where they are essentially receiving the um, the direct intelligence feeds from various sensors and platforms out there, and then analyzing that in real time to push it back out to warfighters that need it. I've had friends who have worked kind of the strategic intel side, where they're managing or working closely with agencies like the CIA, NSA, that have career analysts that are looking over the various pieces of intel to determine what's going on, and then they're kind of providing the Air Force liaison piece to that, and then have friends that uh, have worked the kind of the more operational side, where they're taking all of that intelligence that's being derived from other places and helping us as air crew determine, hey, what either at the chaos side, what are the targets that need to get hit? What are the the ways that we need to go about that, weaponeering, etc. All the way through to, okay, here's your targets, here's your ATO frago. What do we as the aircrew need to do to get in, do our mission, and get out safely? Essentially, helping us look at the threats and the mission environment and making determinations on the best way to go about accomplishing that mission.
Okay, no, that's super interesting. I have a friend right now in Hawaii who does geointelligence,
Sure.
so that's why I just asked. Because I imagine before your mission as an air crew, you would get briefed, right? What was that experience like in the training that you got?
Yeah, so it was hard, would be the easiest way I would put it. Flight training is a challenge. Not something where you get to choose the days that you're on. They choose the days you're scheduled, and you need to show up ready to go. And so that was something that was a bit of a challenge for me, was just making sure that every day I got into the airplane, I was on my game and firing on all cylinders. And a lot of that was the preparation that went into it, and not being able to spent most of my life being able to kind of be an athlete and show up, kind of figure it out on the fly.
Mhm.
And when I got to nav training, I found out that that was no longer going to cut it. And I needed to start, days or weeks prior, and prepare and train and be ready. I think it's a Vince Lombardi. Everybody has the will to win. The differentiator is those who have the will to prepare. And I had to kind of develop the will to prepare, because I found out that it didn't matter how well I wanted to do once I got there. If I wasn't ready, I wasn't ready. And so that was a big learning experience for me. Actually, I got really close to failing out of nav school initially, before I kind of developed some of those skills and figured out what I needed to do to get myself back on track.
What do you feel like? It's mainly study skills. Everything you learned in college, just trying to use that again to help you prepare for. Because I imagine it's very intellectual. You're breathing or training through a fire hose. Is that what it's like going through nav school?
Yeah, so it is. So it's all the above. There are fairly intellectual components of it that, if you don't have dialed when you step into the airplane, what we talk about it is, thinking at ground speed zero. You'd be surprised at how hard stuff gets when everything's happening at once and you're under the gun with, with the pressure on. So calculating fuels or ETAs might be easy when you're sitting there on a Saturday with a cup of coffee in your dorm room, figuring it out. When you're trying to do it in the airplane, in between the pilots yelling at you, and ATC doing stuff or whatever else is happening, it becomes far more difficult. And so making sure that those things that you can figure out on your own when the pressure's not on are second nature, and you're not really having to spend a lot of time thinking about how to do the stuff in the airplane is important. And so there's that practice and piece of it. The other part of it is what we would call kind of mission preparation or chair flying. And so, you never expect the mission to go exactly the way that you planned it, but the old adage of plans are useless, planning is everything. The exercise of sitting down and walking through everything that's going to happen, kind of soup to nuts, really helps to effectively rehearse the things that are going to happen and then think about the things that might go wrong or the things that might happen along the way, and kind of do some pre-thinking about it. Because once you get into the airplane and you're moving at 240, 360, 420 knots, stuff starts happening quickly, and you don't have the time to, let me think about that. You kind of have to be preloaded with an answer and be ready to execute. And that was a big learning experience for me, because I tend to like to think about things and realize that, hey, there's not time to debate about this. You have to have an answer ready to go and execute. And so that was a learning experience.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I guess what from that, as you learned, what was it like graduating from that nav school? Like, because you had learned so much to, be successful.
Yeah. So I think I don't want to say that it was a little disappointing, but one of the things I've learned as I've gone through my Air Force career is that whenever you think that you've done and you've graduated, you've got it, that's not the finish. That's just the key to get into the door to start. And so I finished nav school and thought that I would be kind of ready and like, all right, let's do this, and realize that was just the key to get into the door to the next challenge, which was qualifying in my airframe and learning what it was that I actually would be doing as a mission qualified electronic warfare officer. And so that was a whole other process that, I intellectually understood that would happen, but I don't think I was fully ready for kind of the next challenge. And then once you learn that, once you get qualified in that, okay, cool. Well, now there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you're going to have heaped on you and have to learn. The realization that you are never a finished product and you've never gotten to the pinnacle. Every time you learn something, that's just basically a stepping stone to learn the next thing, and on and on and on. And then when you think you've got it all, they'll change airframes on you and you'll start back from effectively ground zero and have to learn it all the way back up again.
At the end of Navigator school, do they tell you, hey, you're going to this airframe at this duty station, basically, and it's all like an OML type of deal?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it has changed slightly. The current school at Pensacola has gone through a couple of iterations of how they are tracking folks and then selecting, airframes and then ultimately bases. When I went through, there were two tracks, the kind of straight navigator track and the electronic warfare officer track. And I thought I enjoyed a lot of the electronic warfare officer stuff more than some of the navigator things. And so I elected to go that route. And that kind of constrained the number of airframes that would be available to me when I graduated. And then about a month before we graduated, they ended up, we called track selecting, or not track selecting, having a drop night. And, number one person in the class got to go up and, all the airframes are on board, and he got to go up and take his airframe off the board for the slots that were available for our class. And then number two in the class got to go up and do the same thing. So she selected her airframe, and I selected my airframe, and then everybody else kind of selected the airframes that were left. And I selected the EC-130 going to Tucson, Arizona, just because I thought that the mission sounded really neat, doing that electronic attack mission. I also thought that Tucson would be cool, and a lot of the other positions were to the RC-135 going back to Omaha, Nebraska. And so I partially joined the Air Force to go see the world, and the thought of going straight back to Nebraska was not something I was ready for just yet.
So what is it like now that you're electronic warfare on that airframe? do you go to another school in Tucson to then qualify on that airframe?
Yeah. So for most Air Force aviation, they'll have a kind of an undergraduate program. And so that will give you your wings. So you'll graduate from that. I did for navigators, I went through San Antonio. Now they're going through Pensacola, but once they finish that, they will get their combat systems officers wings, and then they will transition to another course at that point. For pilots and some of the other fighter airframes, they might go to introductory fighter fundamentals, followed by the B course for that airframe. For most combat systems officers and pilots, they'll go to they call the formal training unit or flying training unit for their airframe, and then they will actually get qualified in the airplane that they're going to fly. For us, that was co-located with the combat squadrons in Tucson. So it was about a 7-month process to go through the training in that particular airframe, and then qualified, get a check ride, and now you're a mission qualified electronic warfare officer in the EC-130H.
Okay. What electronic warfare are you able to do, or that you can talk about?
Yeah, so I can't necessarily speak about the exact targets. So every, and this is one of the things that I've been really happy about being a combat systems officer, because pilots, you learn how to be a pilot, and it's very similar. Wherever you go, being a pilot is kind of being a pilot. Combat systems officers are going to have a very different role in every individual airframe they go to, because they're so focused on the mission, and because the mission is so variable. And so, I got to do the EC-130H, which was focused on offensive electronic attack as an electronic warfare officer, which is different from, what say an electronic warfare officer on the AC-130 or MC-130 or RC-135 might be doing. But for us, the Compass Call is an offensive electronic attack platform, and essentially we would be jamming enemy, primarily communications targets. And so depending on the environment, the targets that were available, we would allocate the jamming resource that we had available to us to targets dynamically as as that engagement or as the mission progressed. And it was pretty neat, because you'd get that feedback from the folks that were working at either you go to an exercise and you get to talk to the Red Force afterwards, and they were like, "Man, we couldn't do anything." And it was like, "Yeah," or you get to talk to the guys on the ground, and they're talking about how, hey, we were taking fire from this axis, and then you guys went buzzer on, and essentially the shooting stopped. I was like, "Oh, that's pretty sexy." You can see that impact to the work that you're doing. That was really satisfying. Training, a little less exciting because it's a little more abstract, but certainly when you could put that to use in the real world and see the impacts of what you're doing was really satisfying.
How did you like Tucson?
So
Fort Huachuca?
Yeah, so Fort Huachuca is just south, and we would go down there occasionally and brief just the Army. So I believe it's your MI school. It's down.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we'd go down and brief them on some of our capabilities, because there's some overlap between what we could do and some a number of the Army platforms, as well as kind of not to get too nerdy, the electromagnetic spectrum is only so wide.
Yeah.
With a lot of the other stuff that was being loaded up in the spectrum in OEF, OIF, just kind of some briefing on, here's what we do, here's the impacts on what we can do when you guys do this, and here's the impact of what you guys are doing when we're doing this. So, trying to talk to everybody about getting to play nice in the electromagnetic spectrum was kind of fun. But yeah, so Fort Huachuca's down in Sierra Vista. We were at Davis-Monthan in Tucson, and Tucson was great, especially coming from Nebraska. Arizona was very different and super neat, because I just had something different entirely. Missed having 4 seasons, basically summer, really hot summer, and then summer again. It doesn't really ever get, there's no actual winter in Tucson, Arizona. I think the coldest it ever got was 18 degrees when I was down there. That basically shut the entire city down, but it was just really neat. Enjoyed the Southwest. My first time living in the West. First time living in the Southwest, and until I came to Albuquerque, thought that's maybe where I'd actually end up was going back to Tucson. We came out here 2018 and found out that it's a lot like Tucson. Great food, mountains, dry air, not a whole lot of humidity. You can do stuff outside almost year round without freezing. It's then so we decided we wanted to come back, and so had the opportunity to come back to do the ROTC thing here.
Did you guys get sent on deployments or anything like that?
Yeah. So when I first showed up, graduated NAV school in summer of 2007, got to Davis-Monthan. Fall of 2007 was supposed to start initial fall at the FTU there that fall, and through some snags in the kind of the way folks had been sent to Tucson, the pipeline was backed up. And so I was actually the executive officer, which is different from the executive officer and, like Army and Navy speak. I was essentially the commander's admin guy for about 9 months while I waited to start training. That was super helpful just to kind of see the Air Force at a kind of a different perspective, and then also get to, have a direct line to a sitting commander who could kind of mentor me on, what a career in the Air Force looked like, what sorts of things I needed to do to be successful, and kind of see some of that behind the scenes, let's say the soft underbelly of how the Air Force operates, if that makes sense. So that when I went through training and became a, fully qualified Air Force member, I knew what I needed to do on the admin side to kind of keep myself on the right track. But qualified summer of 2009, and then deployed in 2009 for the first time. That was to Kuwait, supporting Iraq. Ended up coming back, turned around about 4 months later, and went out the door to Qatar, to the Air Operations Center there as a liaison for my platform, which was really neat to see kind of the operational level of what the Air Force is doing, managing assets between theaters, and how we kind of wage an air war to support the operations and campaigns that are happening on the ground.
Because how does it work as an Air Force officer, being a lieutenant? You're attached to your airframe, but then you kind of said you could also be a liaison. Is that a second lieutenant sort of duty that officers can do? Is that you're sort of in a planning a billet?
Yeah. So for me, I was a first lieutenant by that point.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's a first lieutenant or captain, because they need you to know enough about your airplane to be able to speak to it at the kind of the planning table. And so the way the Air Operations Center works is they run the air tasking cycle. And so everything from the strat cell that is kind of developing where this air campaign needs to go and what big things we need to be doing, to the combat plans division that is actually, assigning weapons to targets and then aircraft to weapons, and building that framework of everything that needs to go out the door each day to make the missions happen, to the combat operations division that is actually real-time executing airplanes in the air, dynamic metallic tasking aircraft to targets. When we were there, it's kind of during the heights. That would have been 2010, and Afghanistan and Iraq were pretty hot and heavy. And so it was probably twice a day that you'd have the siren go off. BCD would make the, troops in contact call, and, we'd start trying to figure out what airframes and weapons are nearby that we can send that direction. If we had an airplane in the air, a lot of times they'd get pulled off target to go support that. A lot of dynamic air refueling. Hey, we need gas. We've been extended. Can you find me a tanker? Those sorts of things. So we weren't doing the mission planning necessarily for the crews, but we were, as the liaison at the KAOC, answering the mail for those air crews that were doing the mission planning. Hey, to do this mission, I need, 10,000 pounds of gas 4 hours into my mission. Okay. Hey, liaison, I go over to the tanker planning cell and, say, hey, we need gas here. And then they would find a tanker, or, hey, we don't have a tanker then. Can you guys get it, an hour earlier? Hey, can you guys get it an hour earlier? Yes, we can do that. That sort of thing. Kind of you're the guy that is, or gal, it's kind of answering those questions, making those mission taskings make sense for the air crews that are actually executing them, and then vice versa, communicating up the challenges of those taskings up to the folks that are tasking them to say, hey, this doesn't work for us because X, Y, or Z. Can we change the mission, in this way? Hey, we need this additional support, that kind of stuff. They are being provided with the support that they need to actually execute.
Okay, that's really awesome. From there, taking on this role, did this basically set you up to wanting to go and sort of teach later? Because was that your next assignment after this?
No, so that was actually just deployment. So I did that for 4 months.
Okay.
I did get to go though afterwards, and so two things that I thought were cool. One, I got set up actually to go and help instructor rotation at the National Training Center. There was a opportunity through JIADO to pull electronic warfare instructors, if you will, out to help teach some of the counter RCID instruction that was happening at Fort Irwin. We didn't have any actual instructors, and so they were like, "Hey, you just got back from the KI. Do you want to go do that?" And so I got to go out for about a month and talk to the Army about electronic warfare, and thought that was super cool. And then actually got to I was selected for upgrade to instructor about a year after that, and got to start teaching the airplane. Found that I really enjoyed teaching, even more so necessarily than doing it myself. Getting to help other people understand and seeing people grow and seeing the light bulb come on when somebody's struggling, and you kind of help them reframe the problem or think about it a little differently, and then they get it. And so that was really my first opportunity to teach, and thought it was pretty neat. And so I ended up transitioning in 2013 from 130H in Tucson to the MC 130H, AFSOC platform, and upgraded to instructor a couple of years after that. Decided that, hey, what I really want to do is do more teaching and instructing, and selected to go to the weapons instructor course, become a weapons instructor. Thought I was going to go back and teach the squadron, and they sent me to staff to do tactics, which was really neat as well.
And is that all on the airframes you've been assigned to, like the C-130s?
Yep.
Or okay.
Yeah. So I not because I've been constrained to C-130s. It's just happened that I've been on some version of C-130 on my entire career. But typical progression is you'll qualify as a basic qualified aircrew member or mission qualified aircrew member, and then after a certain number of hours in the airframe and the recommendation of your commander, you will go to instructor upgrade. And at that point, you will be an instructor. Typically at the unit, you will, as a new instructor, you'll be there to fly with kind of the new folks, get folks recurrent. So if you go non-current for any of your mission events, then you have to fly with instructor to get recurrent. I lucked out in Tucson because our formal training unit was right there. And so once I got qualified as instructor, I got to work with brand new students coming up through the pipeline, and not just teaching folks who already knew what they were doing to make sure they didn't screw up, but actually working with new students who didn't know. And that was super satisfying. That was really cool. And got to go to Air Command Staff College. Really enjoyed that. And so when I had the opportunity to go back to Air Command Staff College and teach, I jumped at the opportunity. And then when the opportunity to come to ROTC and teach presented itself, I jumped at that opportunity too.
And the Air Command and Staff College, that is at, is that in Colorado Springs?
No, so Air Command and Staff College would be the equivalent to CGSC. And it's in Montgomery, Alabama at Maxwell Air Force Base.
Okay. And what specifically were you able to do there, sir?
Yeah, so I was teaching in the Air Power Department, but primarily teaching military history.
Okay.
We taught a course, Air Power Strategy and Operations, that effectively followed application of air power from World War I all the way up through the Gulf War and Operation Allied Force, etc., looking at how air power was used, what objectives they were attempting to accomplish, and then how effectively that application met the requirements that they were looking for. And so it was really neat to be able to take both kind of the history aspect, because I think history is pretty neat, and combine that with, what I understood about air power application, and teach that back to the students at that operational level of how is air power best employed to meet Joint Force Commander objectives in both battlefields across time, but also what principles you can apply to kind of modern air power, and what does that mean for future conflicts.
Yeah, I could only imagine the amount of capabilities we have today, like the electronic warfare, I would almost say crazier, more complex because of everything that we have at our disposal, especially with, the Space Force and stuff like that today.
Yeah.
But
No, it's pretty neat. And I think there's a lot of possibility in where we're going with RPAs, with space, with a lot of the ability to send and receive data in ways that we haven't necessarily been able to in the past, and what that means for the way that we move forward, and what does air power look like in 10, 15, 20 years compared to where we've been in the past.
While you're at Command and General Staff College for the Air Force, were you seeing space emerging?
So the decision was made to create a Space Force while I was at Air Command and Staff College in 2018, 2019. Was it 2018 or 2019? So I'm not sure where exactly that decision was made, but I know I was there when it happened. Space has always been important, and I'll be honest that I'm a little remiss in exactly the things that space does, because it's kind of like logistics, in that it's something that most people don't think about. Stuff just happens, and you don't think about how you get the data. You have the data, and I think we're starting to, and part of the push for the Space Force is starting to see space as a warfighting domain, and having to compete for the ability to use space for the things that we need it for when it's being contested. Much like we didn't think about how we got milk in the chow hall at Bagram, it just kind of showed up. That's not necessarily given in future conflicts. We're going to have to fight to get the things we need into theater, to the point of need. And I think space, very similarly, we are going to have to fight to maintain space dominance, and use space for the things that we need it for to support white fighters, either in the air or on the ground, in ways we haven't in the past. And my experience with space is pretty limited, but the little bit that I've seen of it, it is definitely important. It is increasing in importance, and our adversaries recognize that and are taking steps to contest our use of space, and also to use space themselves in ways that could potentially remove some of our warfighting advantages in the air and ground.
Had you ever thought of maybe trying to do anything in that career field at all?
Thought about it, yes. Space is a weird one, just because a lot of it's pretty hush hush, so I can't really speak to much on that front. But the going back to electromagnetic spectrum, you can take a piece of paper and hand it to a pilot and have him get into an airplane and go fly. You can't do that with satellites. Everything has to go through the EMS. And so looking at space and looking at the proliferation of both assets in space and uses for those assets in space, the electromagnetic spectrum is a huge portion of that. So, anybody who has, experience dealing with the electromagnetic spectrum, there's opportunities potentially in kind of that space realm, just because of the importance of both those chunks of the spectrum that are used to get data to and from space, or between satellites, but also the cyberspace aspect of the ones and zeros and the networks that are connecting to those space-based assets through the electromagnetic spectrum.
Okay. No, that's super interesting, because I understand that here at Air Force ROTC, cadets can try to go into Space Force, correct?
Yeah, and so I think Colonel Cunningham put it like, it's nice to be a grandparent as a so even though the Air Force, so the Space Force is part of the Department of the Air Force. They are a separate service, and much like Navy ROTC services both the Navy and the Marine Corps, we service both those services. For cadets that want to join the Space Force, it's a selection prior to going to field training. Their sophomore year, they compete for enrollment allocation, essentially for a commissioning spot in that fiscal year, which they'll commission with the Space Force. And then once they commission, they go to Colorado Springs for their space basic course. A little bit different from the way that the Air Force does things, just because the Air Force is so much bigger than the Space Force is. The Space Force officers currently, their training essentially covers the full gamut of things that they might do. So, intelligence, space operations, and acquisitions. And then they'll receive an assignment out of training that is in one of those areas, with the potential that eventually they'll flex between those silos, at different points in their career. Part of that's because for the Space Force, those are so entwined. Understanding the space operations side affects your ability to kind of understand the threats in the space environment, but also understand the capabilities and requirements for space-based vehicles that we need to be acquiring and putting into operation. And so those three sections are kind of, and the idea is that you have people that have experience in all three of those that can flow between. I don't know how it'll actually work out in practice. They're working that out now, but that's the theory as I understand it, at least.
Because I know last year you guys commissioned one to go into the Space Force, super awesome. But then are you seeing more students coming into the Air Force wanting to do, specifically go that route? Or
yeah, so we had one that we commissioned into Space Force last year. Don't think we have any Space Force folks will commission this year. We have one next year, but the class that's coming up has I think 3 or 4 folks that are interested in the Space Force as a career, and then continuing from there. I think part of it, the Space Force is still fairly new, and so folks don't know. I think folks don't necessarily know how, if that's a career that you want to do, how do you get into that? And also, just because it doesn't have the visibility of something like the Air Force, where you can go to an air show or see airplanes flying around and be like, that looks cool, I want to do that. Satellites are kind of out there in the blackness of space, and you don't necessarily see what space does for you in the kind of tangible ways that getting to see an airplane or a tank or a ship goes, that looks awesome, I want to do that. So I think it's trending that direction. I think folks are starting to see what space does and how important that is, and look at career fields or look at careers in the Space Force, and then learning that, hey, Air Force ROTC is how they get to that. And so, we're getting more students showing up with an interest in space from the point they walk in the door, whereas previously it was they want to join the Air Force, and then they talk to somebody in the Space Force and they go, that looks cool. Yeah, I guess we'll do that.
No, it's super cool and exciting to see, how things develop in the future. Yeah, being here at ROTC now, what you were discussing that before we started the podcast, observing your sophomore class. Can you tell us a little bit about the progression of Air Force cadets and what that's like?
Typically, the traditional cadet will join us as a freshman with 4 years to run in their college career. As a freshman, it's really about getting oriented to the military environment. How do we, customs and courtesies, wear uniforms, do PT, those sorts of basic competencies. And then they come back as sophomores, and we're looking for more of that type of leadership potential, problem solving. How are they, leading amongst their peers? How are they handling high pressure scenarios, decision making, those sorts of competencies as we're making that selection for field training.
And what specifically do you guys do on your weekly basis to sort of assess that? In the Army ROTC, we have like a leadership lab. We take them out to the Bosque to assess how they do small unit tactics.
Yeah, so a lot of it is that not necessarily small unit tactics, like you guys do, but working in groups to accomplish objectives that we give them, whether that is deliberate, we call group leadership problems, which is, our kind of tasks that we give them, essentially, problem solving puzzles, if you will, that they have to work as a group to solve, or even something as simple as how do you get a flight of 15 people from here to Johnson Field in a given period of time with the constraints of you have to march in formation, you have to perform proper road guard crossing procedures, things like that. I don't want to say friction, but they add challenges. You can't just lollygag from here to Johnson Field. You have to get everybody over there, do it in a certain way and follow certain procedures and figure out how you're going to do that the best way possible. Typically, it'll be under time constraints. So we usually give them, hey, we need you to do this thing with a certain period of time just to put a little more pressure. And we typically prioritize things like precision, leadership. How are you working amongst your peers? Are you able to meet the standards that we are kind of setting out? And sometimes there are situations where you can't meet all the requirements all at once. And so how are you prioritizing those things that you can and can't do to make sure that you're doing the things that are most important? And then, coming back to ask for either additional resources or additional time to fix the ones that maybe aren't your top priorities. How are they managing in situations where there's just not enough time or resource to do everything? And so we create situations during our leadership laboratories that force them to kind of think on their feet and solve those problems. And then we watch.
Okay.
So,
And I was wondering, what does the challenges cadets face at their summer training that they do their sophomore and junior year? Because I've heard it was sort of small unit tactics in a way, right? Like downed airman drills, like you can go navigate to somebody to help them. I guess, yeah. What do you guys throw at them?
Yeah, can't really speak to it entirely. So kind of new to the position. Haven't seen the modern iteration of field training up close, but a lot of it is similar to what we do in the lab. There's never enough time. There are always rules and constraints that you're operating within. Sometimes there are problems that are thrown at you that you're not expecting or aren't ready for. And then we're looking for cadets to dynamic problem solve, prioritize the things that they need to do, and move out, essentially. That happens both in more, let's say, academic, but not necessarily kind of a more garrison situations at field training, but also there's a field component of field training where they do more of that kind of, for lack of a better term, army type stuff, even if it's not necessarily what they'll be doing as Air Force members once they get, qualified, etc.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. And what sort of special opportunities do you have for the cadets? Is there anything to incentivize them, like language training?
Yeah, so we have a host of opportunities that we send cadets to. During the school year, there are things like the National Character and Leadership Symposium, which happens at the Air Force Academy typically in February. So right now we are taking applications for cadets to go up and spend a few days listening to speakers on leadership, character, ethics, and interfacing with LTC cadets from around the country. There are some other opportunities that emerge. We have a You Can Fly or You Can Certify scholarship, which gives folks money to essentially go and fly airplanes at a local fixed-based operator. All that happens during the school year. And then in between school years, during the summer, there are officer development trainings that the Air Force makes available that are a whole host of things, from internships in various organizations where you go as a cadet and basically shadow active duty members doing jobs in places, to things like the Academy Freefall program, where you actually get to go jump out of airplanes, opportunities to go and, like you mentioned, Project Go. We had one of our cadets that went to Tanzania and Kenya last year for almost a month. I don't know if that opportunity is available this year just based on funding of the program. There's a whole host of summer officer development training opportunities that are out there that are constantly emerging and changing for Space Force cadets, there is a required officer development training that they go to typically between their junior and senior year called Azimuth. And that is a little bit like where as I understand it, like the Navy puts their midshipmen on ships for a few months in the summer. They take Space Force cadets and put them over the shoulder with Space Force members doing the mission for a few months in the summer, just to kind of familiarize them with what it is that they'll be doing. So as they go forward, they can be aware of what they're preparing themselves for in a more deliberate way.
That's really awesome. I'm glad they do have that opportunity. I know they're still emerging and stuff like that. Really cool that they get to go and work with Space Force officers to understand those systems. How many students do you have use that opportunity to go get flight hours the Air Force would pay for?
Yeah, so it's depending on...
Because, sorry to interrupt, but I saw that you guys have a flyer downstairs about a club. So is that attached to the club, or how does that work?
No, I don't know about the I did see the flyer for the aviation club. That's not us. That's
okay.
I think a university side organization. But for the you can fly, you can certify, it's based on the number of cadets you have. And so there's a percentage that the Air Force runs of, based on how many cadets that are eligible, each detachment gets a certain number of scholarships that they can award. And then we look primarily based on the kind of the intent of the scholarship. So, it's really about getting people that don't have aviation experience an opportunity to see if aviation is something that they would actually be interested in. Somebody who already has their private pilot's license, I'm guessing that they already know they like to fly. But from the Air Force perspective, you might have somebody that thinks that being a pilot might be cool, but they're not really sure. They've never really flown an airplane themselves. And so giving them an opportunity to go and check it out and see, hey, is this for me? One, increases the pool of potential applicants for those rated aircraft fields, pilot, combat systems officer, air battle manager, be a pilot. But it also helps to maybe eliminate folks that would realize, they like the idea of flying, but you actually put them in an airplane and they're like,
yeah, no, honestly,
no, not for me.
I totally agree with that. I remember when I started my private pilot's license, the first day I got sick, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. But me and my buddy, he was all gung-ho about it. So we just continued to fly and stuff like that all the way through the summer of COVID when that was happening. But yeah, getting somebody that opportunity to like understand this is what it's like flying in an airplane. Yeah.
Did you end up finishing?
I'm in the process of it right now. I have all my hours. I just need to do my check ride. That's pretty much it. So, but I remember also doing, I don't know what sort of maneuvers you guys do, and I'm sure, because I was in, C-130 and C-17.
Yep.
And yeah, some of those maneuvers and stuff, I imagine can get pretty wild and jarring.
Air sickness is just one of those things that, it can be a challenge. Like anything else, though, you can familiarize your body with the environment over time. Particularly if you're doing it, you build up a tolerance for.
Right, exactly.
If you're doing it, if you're flying all the time, it can be a little painful as you're getting started, but once it becomes routine, it's easy, and your body just is used to that stuff. I never got airsick when I was younger, and as I started to get older, I'm not sure if that's because I'm getting older or because as I've gotten older, I fly less often compared to the amount of time that I'm stuck in an office. And so when I do fly, I'm flying once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, and you're just like right into it. Certainly the low level TAC flights are, if you're not ready for it, it can be a nauseating experience to, be whipping around at 300 feet off the ground in the mountains. Yeah.
But exciting. Going off of all of that, do you have any advice and recommendations to cadets coming into your program this year?
Yeah. So I would say, first, be humble. Recognize that however much you've learned, there's always more to learn. However good you think you are, you're probably not good enough. Recognizing that it's not about you, it's about the mission. I had, as a cadet, I thought I was way better than I was. And it was kind of a harsh experience to realize that, hey, you may have been top of the heap as a high schooler, but you come to the military and you're working with some exceptional folks, some really, really exceptional personnel. And where you may have been top of your high school class, you come here and you're middle of the pack. And that's both awesome because you're working with other folks that are exceptional, but it can also be a little bit of a challenge if you don't recognize that, hey, these folks are just as smart as you, just as capable as you. If you try and treat them as though you are smarter than them, you're probably not, and it's probably not going to go well for you. So just having that little bit of humility of, hey, I'm here with other smart people. I'm a smart person. You're a smart person. Let's be smart people together. I think will be really helpful. Understanding that it's a learning process. Everybody's learning. I've been doing this for 19 years and I'm still learning. And because of the nature of the business, war is a learning competition. And so you have to keep learning constantly. You can't just sit and rest on your laurels, and understanding that you're never a finished product, I think is one of the things that I had to change my perspective about for folks that are coming in. I would recommend they just start with the perspective that every single day I'm going to have to be learning something new. And if I'm not learning something new, then I probably need to start learning something new, because we can't stay static. The world of warfare is a treadmill, and standing still is moving backwards. So we've got adversaries that are moving forward at a run, and we need to be moving forward at a run too.
Awesome. I like the treadmill analogy. I'm gonna have to use that. Sir, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate your service. We're excited to see where the Air Force ROTC goes from here.
Awesome.